Well, hello. I don't know if you guys can hear me. Welcome to the stream. Um, I apologize for, there we go, full screen. Yikes. I apologize for this being somewhat disorganized, but whatever. It'll be fun anyways. That was the Tabernacle Choir with a song that I learned when listening to General Conference one time. Um, I like that song quite a bit. But the topic of today's stream is it's going to be an interfaith or intertradition stream. You could say we're the same faith, but intertradition stream where we're coming from different traditions and different backgrounds and chatting with each other. And it's going to be with some Mormon friends or LDS friends, and then a few other people might hop in as well. So I kind of want to give some background and then invite everyone up onto the stage so we can get into our conversation, our dialogue together. We live in kind of weird times, kind of cool times where people are meeting with different groups, maybe groups that you didn't used to chat with. I just saw something the other day, real quick. I want to show you. I was listening to a psalm, and a video came up of this Hebrew kids choir, and then another video was suggested to me of this Scottish lady commenting on that. So it's just like a good illustration of the times we're in. So here's the Hebrew children's choir.
Lights up! Bring those lights up!
And then and then this lady from in Scotland, she's online watching this and
What did they
reacting.
put in this song? Because I don't speak Hebrew. Come on, David Hershkovitz, take it away!
So we just live in interesting times where you get that kind of mashup. So today is going to be kind of that kind of a stream. So real quick, my history with Mormons was I think we gave a Mormon or LDS gal a ride to school when I was in 6th grade. And then in the church I grew up in, we were taught that Mormons were a cult. And in our tradition, that basically just meant that they had beliefs that we considered heterodox or not orthodox beliefs. It wasn't really well defined. And then eventually I had some interactions with LDS missionaries. And since that was kind of my background, it was just kind of like theological arguments is what it ended up being. So it didn't really go very deep, and I didn't really get to know them very well. And to be honest, I didn't really even understand their beliefs well. It wasn't until a few years back during COVID, and I won't get into the story, it's kind of a crazy story, but I met some missionaries during COVID, got to know them better than I'd gotten to know missionaries in the past. And then that's when I started digging into uh, what do Mormon people actually believe and having conversations with them. So, and even beyond the missionaries. So I got to know the missionaries fairly well, but then people just on the broader internet and people in the active LDS community, ex-Mormon community, different groups, and just had a chance to start listening to them and hearing about their experience. And so tonight, I hope to do more of that and open it up for anyone else. So I'm going to invite the panel on the stage to kind of introduce themselves, tell us their name, their background. A lot of LDS members serve a 2-year mission. So if you went on a mission, where'd you go? and then your favorite color, your favorite flavor of ice cream, and I can't remember what other question I had, but I think it was maybe what experience do you have with other faith traditions? So let me invite everyone on. Welcome to the stage. All right, what's the best way to do this? All right. Welcome, gentlemen. Maybe we'll start with Sean and we'll go around and you can give me a little bit of your story and your background. And I'll mute my mic. Let's just mute our mics while the other people are talking, and then we'll go from there. So welcome.
Well, great. It's nice to be here. So I'm Sean, and my background is I grew up in Salt Lake City. I come from families that have definitely been Mormon for a long time. I have one, I forget how many greats this grandfather is, but Thomas Robert Green Welch was one of the first settlers of Morgan County, just north of Salt Lake. So definitely Mormon. I also, so on the mission question, I did serve I served for 6 months in Germany. There were some difficulties. I needed to come home early, but that was an experience that I got to have, and was called to a mission that was actually where my my great grandfather Kruger originated from before he immigrated to Salt Lake. So that was kind of a fun thing in the Germany Leipzig mission. But let's see, I've got your questions here. So favorite flavor of ice cream, I'm going to say cherry chocolate chip, though I have been off recreational sugar since April, so that one's more of a remembering how things have been. And let's see, there was also, I believe the thing I have here says that you asked about what churches I've attended. I have had a couple of experiences where I've got to visit other churches. There's actually a synagogue in town that I was invited to go and enjoy a service at. So that was an educational experience because it was very educational to hear the symbolism that they had for the bread and the water, because there was existing symbolism before Jesus gave it more. So, but that's kind of me and my background.
Well, thank you. And do you know what flavor of synagogue it was? Are there different flavors?
I am not sufficiently familiar with the Jewish community to know the difference of one type versus another. Plus, this was back when I was in high school, so we're talking more than 20 years ago. I really have not retained.
Okay, cool. Well, welcome. Stephen, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Stephen Fellows. I am also from Utah. I've also spent a lot of time living in Chicago in my life, but pandemic allowed me to come back. I did serve a mission as well. I served in West Africa. I was originally called to the Ivory Coast. A civil war broke out pretty soon after entering the country. We had to evacuate, and so my mission call was changed to Ghana. I spent a little time in Togo as well, but it was mostly Ghana that I spent most of my mission. So I loved it there. Stay in contact with a handful of people, and let's see, favorite ice cream. I have liked peanut butter cup for a really long time, but I've been a little bit on like a gelato kick, and I like kind of the fruit flavors. So raspberry and lemon is kind of where I'm going right now. And then as far as other denominations and worldviews that I've been interested in, I've been really philosophically minded. So I've always kind of researched a lot of philosophy and theology, often through a theological lens. That's actually where I mostly focus. But I've looked at Aristotle, Plato, like so Neoplatonism eventually, and worldviews like Hinduism, especially Advaita Vedanta. And I have like a library upstairs. I haven't read it all, but of all the world scriptures, I try to gather a collection of different world scriptures. So I have the Quran, have Buddhist scriptures, Taoism. As far as actually visiting in person, though, I've gone to Baptist church, a lot of non-denominational Christian churches. I've been to a Catholic mass. So I've gone around to some Christian churches. So that's primarily been, like in person, different Christian faiths. But I have a wide variety of interests in world religions and theology and philosophy generally. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you want to get to know Stephen better, I think I'd invited a few people to participate on a Catholic channel that I was involved with back in the day. And so you were one of the people that volunteered and had that dialogue and told some of your story. So that was really cool. And I think it's still up on the Catholic Versus channel. So maybe I'll try and remember to link that. But that I would definitely recommend that people watch that. That was a fascinating conversation. And it's kind of a weird confluence because I ended up in a group on Facebook that's called, what's it called? Jordan Peterson and the Latter-day Lobsters or something.
Yeah,
and
it's a really long name. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was a group of mostly LDS, but not all LDS, who all appreciated Jordan Peterson's work, at least initially. Now it's just a hodgepodge of people. But that was a super interesting group. And it kind of paralleled another group, one that Matt is a part of, which is called This Little Corner of the Internet, which also got its start with Jordan Peterson. So this is kind of like two worlds kind of separately colliding, but that have a lot of similarities. And then Daniel, welcome. And can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah. So my name's Daniel Stark. I'm actually from Auburn, Alabama. So I've lived around a lot of evangelicals pretty much most of my life. Well, I mean, I did go to BYU. And anyways, just job stuff and circumstances brought me back here. So I've been back here for a few years and probably will be here for at least the foreseeable future. I mean, who knows what the future comes. I did serve a mission. I served in Detroit, Michigan for 2 years. That was great. Other philosophies. I've been really very attracted to interested in Stoicism and that kind of thing with Marcus Aurelius and all that. I've also interested in Eastern philosophies, even stuff because there's Buddhism, but Buddhism also is sort of it's a philosophy and a supernatural stuff. I've been more interested in the philosophical aspect, although I get to the supernatural aspects of it. I actually another thing I liked is Nietzsche, the atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche and his thoughts, which I don't know if I agree with a lot of them. I do find them fascinating though. Very, very insightful there. Other churches I've been to evangelical churches a number of times just because part of the nature of where I am, and sometimes just community things happen there. But I've been to some of their services before. The first time I ever went to more the rock band evangelical churches, I was like, whoa, what is this? It's like a rock concert, but at church. I kind of blew my mind a little bit. But I've been to Catholic mass too a couple times. And that was actually really, really interesting experience. But yeah, so was there anything else I missed or?
I think favorite flavor of ice cream.
Oh, my favorite flavor of ice cream. I really like the peppermint stuff that comes out at Christmas. So that's probably my favorite flavor.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you. Sometimes it's definitely a cross-cultural experience to visit another church. I've been to 2 or 3 LDS church meetings, sacrament meetings, and so that was cool. And then Orthodox, Catholic, and then actually this morning I went to the Old Apostolic Finnish Lutheran Church, So that was an interesting experience. I enjoy that. I enjoy church tourism. Matt, welcome to the stream. Matt is the other person that's part of the dialogue who's not LDS, at least not that I think.
Yeah, not as of yet. Yeah, hi, my name's Matt. I'm a Presbyterian. Most of my life is in Florida, but I was raised in South Carolina. Never met an LDS on mission. Never got the knock on my door, although I would have enjoyed it. First experience was a professor in grad school who was LDS, and then a student who was a couple years ahead of me, who was also LDS, and we got to work together a bit at a post-grad thing. And I think the main thing that was it was fascinating and frustrating is, and only having that limited experience, I couldn't calibrate to whether or not this was is the LDS cultural thing or just the eccentricities of the particular two that I knew on a first name basis, but it was very hard to win my professor, and it could just be because he was a professor, but I also had a Muslim professor, and he would openly talk about things, if I just kind of signaled after hours that, like, hey, could we just put on this different hat and talk about stuff, religion or something, and he'd do it. But not my LDS professor. And that was 2 years of trying to win him to just like chat on that level, as colleagues, and I got a bit of it right out, like as I was going out the door, like my final grades were turned in, and I got a little bit of it, and I was like, wow, that was a taste of something I would have really enjoyed more of, had I had more opportunity. And yeah, and there were moments like we had a colleague in grad school who got married, and she got married at a Protestant church, and then everybody showed up except my LDS professor, and I don't know, he had like a vacation scheduled. Then it was so tight-lipped. We were like, well, maybe he just can't come for religious reasons, and he didn't want to say it. It was one of those kind of things where we just didn't know where he stood. And I think, I don't know. I guess that's all to say that, like, I find the LDS faith eminently fascinating, and I don't get chances. I don't get as much chances as Risto gets. Get very few to chat with folks like you guys, and in particular to just hear like where you guys like to level set the conversation, as peers, as co-religionists, as fellow Americans, however you want to, like, whatever yardstick you would like to use. Like, what would like a trusting conversation look like where you guys get to set the tone on what, I even feel bad about saying you guys, do you know what I mean? But like how do things get conversed? Because I've heard of the 2-year trip, and it seems like a lot of conversations happen then. And then after the 2-year trip, the only experiences I've had is basically where it should not be discussed. Is the impression I got. It was more of a defensive situation, and that felt really tragic, and it was kind of heartbreaking, honestly, because I felt like it didn't have to be anticipated to be an adversarial relationship. Although maybe Protestants in particular have felt beaten up, and so they want to beat up on one group that they feel like they can beat up on. So maybe that has been earned. That defensive-ness has been earned. But that's my limited experience. Also, favorite ice cream flavor is Oreo cookie. I don't know why. It's just a guilty pleasure. So that's me. Thank you.
And-
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm honestly, I told Risto, like, I'm super excited about just having 2 ears and only one mouth. I really want to hear how you guys what sort of pictures you want to paint about where you're coming from, So
That's good. You've 3 great questions there, 3 or 4 great questions. I think probably our conversation should center around those. Real quick before we get started with that, Matt, what are some? So you're Presbyterian today. Have you always been Presbyterian? What are some of your stops on your Pilgrim's Progress?
Yeah, thank you. Apologies. I was already doing the thing where I was raised Unitarian Universalist, which was basically recycle and vote Democrat, or you're going to the bad place, I guess. And bumped up against evangelicalism in high school. And that's when I would say I became a Christian by conviction then, and bumped up against Reformation era theology and the sort of things that what would become known as the restless and reform movement of the 2000s. A lot of young guys were frustrated, and evangelicalism was too boomer coded in hindsight, and they were like, can we get into some crunchy theology and let's read 19th century Dutch Calvinists and stuff, and let's argue about this sort of stuff. And I got swept up in that and was really I don't know, I found that pretty rewarding. Also, my wife was born and raised Presbyterian, so I had who was my girlfriend at the time, I had added reason to impress her parents by trying to figure out all their little in-group signals, what the heck they were talking about over dinner, and that took me on the trip that I am at today. And I've visited, I had a Jewish friend in middle school, and it was like a Reformed synagogue, so fairly liberal. I remember attending that a little bit. I've done Messianic synagogues. It almost I'd be happy to join one of those, but it felt a little like, I don't know. Talk about that's a stream for a different night. Never been to mosque, never been to LDS worship space either. So I've been to Catholic mass. I think I'm probably more limited in my experiences than you guys are, honestly.
Would Presbyterians consider themselves evangelical?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think we categorize ourselves like Lutherans in something that's pre-evangelical. We like the word, but the capital E evangelical, just like Catholic, we would identify as Orthodox Christian, as Catholic Christian, but all with lower case versions of that. Because if it's the branded signage on your wall, we're distinguishing ourselves from that. Maybe a lot of LDS folk can relate to that as well. You might like the words, but you don't want to use the big, you know what I mean? Like once it gets interdenominational, it gets confusing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think we would identify as evangelical.
Okay. That's interesting. I'm learning new stuff about Presbyterians. Yeah, and I guess I didn't say my favorite ice cream flavor. Used to be mint chocolate chip, could be coconut these days. I'm not sure. I feel like my favorite flavor of ice cream is kind of like my church situation these days. Yeah, and I didn't mention that either. I grew up in the Church of the Nazarene, which is kind of a, I would say, a low church Methodist offshoot, sort of. Kind of traditional Nazarene church, like back in the 80s, feels a lot like an LDS sacrament meeting with hymns singing and kind of some formality there. So when I visited the LDS church, it felt very familiar. And then left that church, attended a Calvary Chapel for a little bit, and now am kind of church homeless. I probably still align with Methodism quite a bit, which in LDS church, I believe, has roots in Methodism. Is that right? Some roots?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Joseph was really partial to Methodism out of his early options.
I'd say, yeah. Well, I mean, in the sense that Joseph Smith was more sympathetic to Methodism, and even if you look at the Book of Mormon, I'd say, well, it heavily leans to like a much more Wesleyan free will sort of conception, and it's very And no, I don't mean if I just being honest, it goes pretty hard against Calvinism predestination. Like, it doesn't explicitly say the word Calvinism, but like, I mean, in Second Nephi, it specifically says you have freedom of choice. And in Alma, is it 32, 30? No, it was in like Alma 31, I think. And it was something like that. There's a big Rameumptom thing where like there's these guys called the Zoramites who basically do this. It's supposed to be like this vain prayer. And honestly, a lot of it is like the thing that's really different is that they said there's no Jesus, which obviously Calvinists would not agree with. But aside from that, a lot of it's kind of almost like if the Calvinist haters made the prayer they think the Calvinists say, it's almost kind of like that. Obviously it's not explicitly that, but if you sort of read it, you're like, okay, I understand where this is getting at. So the Book of Mormon is very explicitly, even though it may not use the exact words, the theology is very Wesleyan free will.
And then Matt had mentioned a couple questions that I don't know if I know the answer to. So maybe we could get those answered real quick. Is there kind of a hesitancy sometimes with LDS to get into intertraditional dialogue outside of the mission? So that's the first question.
I'm actually pretty surprised, like from my perspective, at least, like internally as a culture, we're really like, sometimes I feel like almost over eager to like share the gospel and turn everything into a gospel conversation to share our faith. And so I do see like some sort of guardedness, like if it feels like somebody wants to Bible bash, like there is some cultural baggage there. But on an overall basis, like most people that I come across are like really eager to be able to have those type of conversations. So I feel like it's maybe Matt, you ran into like an unfortunate, like, couple individuals that where it's not actually part of the standard culture as much. At least that's my outside perspective without knowing them.
So I think on that question of whether or not people want to engage, it also, it comes down to every community is going to have people who are at varying levels. And just because someone went on a mission doesn't mean that they still have that strong desire to go out and share, or sometimes it means they have such a strong desire to go out and share, they don't know how to have a normal conversation with a person anymore. I have known people who are the type that's like, if they have an opportunity to say anything, it's basically they're starting a missionary discussion or something. And instead of just like reading the room and just being happy to be in conversation with someone, no matter what level the conversation is at. So I'm going to just go ahead and say that can just be wildly variable between
That's
people.
very helpful. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I might have just had a tight-lipped or a shy professor.
And it really gets down to like how much of a core thing in his life is it? And especially being a professor, like what kind of signaling has he had from the school, maybe that this isn't like a safe thing to do? And, like
Sure.
keep your religion out of the classroom because nobody wants that. And that's not like a thing specifically against Mormons. That may also, be part of our postmodernist culture that has kind of taken over colleges. And so a lot of religion may be, unwelcome from an administration side at schools.
Maybe he was highly intuitive and he was 4D chessing it, and he's like, no, Matt, I'm not going to share with you my secret beliefs just to make you want it all the more. Your second question was, I guess, are LDS allowed to attend other traditions, marriages, or services?
If we weren't, we would miss a lot of weddings.
Okay.
Okay. This is
that's
good.
There is nothing official about that. I've never observed anything unofficial about that. But that's not to say that there aren't people who can just be weird about it on things that are just part of their own family culture. Like, I won't put anything past anyone on like how much they can deviate in like being too in and too, insulating themselves against the world, as it were.
Yeah, because I think I found that there's a lot more variety in LDS members than I had expected. Like, it's a pretty broad spectrum. I'm guessing there's probably LDS who wouldn't let their kids read Harry Potter and some that loved it.
Well, I mean, first of all, I never heard, I'm not saying there weren't any, but I never heard, well, again, this is totally anecdotal, so take it for what it's worth. But I never heard of anybody who was like, I mean, even here, like growing up in the South, I did grow up into a couple Christians who were like, oh, Harry Potter's bad. I didn't do something. And even with, it's like, I never really, even at church, I mean, there might have been someone, and again, I was a kid, so there may have been people who were like, oh, we just let his parents talk. So that's all entirely possible. But I never really run into anyone who's like, Harry Potter is full of witchcraft. You shouldn't be. That's never, ever. I've never run into anyone like that. Again, that's totally anecdotal. But I mean, for what it's worth, I've been LDS for a very long time, and I've never run into that. So I mean, but again, it's also totally anecdotal. So it's not like I've put an official, survey about Harry Potter opinions. But again, just based on my experience, I've never run into anyone who's like, you shouldn't read. Again, not saying there's no one that exists, but yeah.
Yeah. But I think interesting to your point, though, I think LDS, the LDS faith is a bit unique in its ability to hold such a broad spectrum of people, because a couple of reasons. I think Joseph Smith himself was very emphasized like freedom of belief and freedom of mind. And as a result of like not wanting to like dictate, and is like kind of heavily against like creedal, like having creeds. He wanted people to have freedom of mind in a large, as large as the window as you can go without collapsing. And in addition, although I had one thought that's just escaping me. I was going to say one of the reasons why we have, just the one point that I think a lot of people often make when they become familiar is that the LDS faith tends to emphasize orthopraxy over orthodoxy. And so that's definitely a bigger push in our religion, is what you're doing as opposed to exactly what beliefs that you have to have, which we still have, stated beliefs and doctrines that are the accepted public norm. But as far as like private beliefs, there is a bit of a wider window, I think, than a lot of other Christian faiths that many tend to be more on the orthodoxy side. Like, this is our set of beliefs, and beliefs are the thing that unite us as opposed to what we do.
Yeah. Is it mostly the temple interview questions? Is that kind of, like to be a fully practicing LDS member that you would have, the ability or be granted, from your, I think it's your bishop, your local pastor, to be able to go to the temple, and so that's like, is that about as strict as any check for orthodoxy would be?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, you go.
Oh yeah, I think that's probably as far as the strictness of orthodoxy goes, which is basically a belief in Jesus Christ, a belief that that Joseph Smith restored what we call the priesthood authority to the earth, and that the current prophet or president of the church is the one who holds the fullness of those keys. Everything else on that list that I can think of right now is more related to practice, like tithing or word of wisdom, which is dietary, like no alcohol, that type of thing. It's more centered again around practice is the majority of those questions. So I think that's as tight as it goes. But even that's to go inside the temple. It's not like you're excluded from being a regular member who's not going to the temple because you don't hold those beliefs. So again, it's a pretty low bar, I think, as far as orthodoxy is concerned.
I'd also say that like a lot of the temple interview questions are purposely worded in a way where there's like interpretation that's allowed. I mean, you can't just interpret anything. So, but they're like, we're like, I mean, sort of like saying like, do you so there's a question about that, like, do you believe like the restoration or the fullness? Like I don't remember it off the top of my head. If I did, I could read that. But it's basically worded in a way where it's like, it's very much like, well, what does it mean, the restoration or whatever? You can do that kind of thing. Like, I mean, obviously you can't just not believe in the restoration, but like there's like interpretive liberties you could do. There are a few, like, again, some that are more like, there are a few that are more cut and dry. The one that's probably the most cut and dry is there's one that's about, there's one that's about, do you like, have any financial obligations to a spouse or children you haven't fulfilled? So that one's like, that's not really up for interpretation. I don't know. Do you have obligations or you don't? I feel like that one's like really not up for interpretation. But the other ones, like tithing, would be probably less so, but even then there's some interpretation of how you do tithing. Like it's 10%. There's sort of like, oh, what 10% of, like, how do you define income, like gross versus net, versus you could go to the NCY 19. How is it interpreted historically and all that kind of stuff, and then they kind of just leave that up in the air. So, so even then, that's a long way to say, it's like it's not like it's like anything goes, but it's also sort of like, well, with most of the questions have some sort of interpretive latitude you have, minus probably the one where it's like, do you have financial obligations to a spouse or children? Because then I don't really know how you can have interpretive latitude now. Either you have it or you don't, but or you're fulfilling it. But other than that, I see most of them have interpretive latitude to that.
So an interesting thing to ponder on, like, what it takes to be a good Mormon is I think it's instructive to look at people who are removed from the church as like, where some of those bounds are, because there are people who in the last year who have been excommunicated, or they like to say had their membership withdrawn, but I feel like that just kind of loses the real flavor of what's going on. And so I still like the term excommunication, even though that's not an official considered accurate term. But like, for example, there have been people in the last year that have been excommunicated because they are publishing things about the historical record that suggests that Joseph Smith never actually practiced polygamy. And one of them, when she talks about it, she talks about how the stake president, when he talked to her about this during that whole process, said it's not about whether or not it is accurate history. It is simply the fact that it is different from the official teaching of the church that she was being excommunicated. And so
she crossed. It's not like there's a specific thing where you have to assent to all the beliefs, but if you're going out there and teaching something publicly,
publishing publicly,
and the leaders say, hey, can you, we don't want you doing that, and then you continue to do that, you could run into a problem.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing about, at least if you're doing specifically about the polygamy denial thing, and this is how I think about it, is that when you do, and again, this goes into the history of this stuff, but Brandon, briefly, the bottom line is why the church is very, it's not, well, they're not like, oh, everyone can have their own thought. It's basically because, okay, so let's say that, which it's not true, but let's just say for a second that, Joseph Smith didn't actually practice plural marriage. That was something made up by Brigham Young. What that basically means is that Brigham Young and a lot of the people who do polygamy denial, when they go down the rabbit hole, this is where they go. Is that because this is where it logically leads. Like, it's basically like, well, Brigham Young brought the LDS Church into apostasy, and they don't now, because they've gotten into apostasy, they have no legitimate priesthood authority. All the ordinances that they've done post Joseph Smith are invalid. Everything, every like baptism, every sacrament is just an invalid thing. It's not truly having legitimate priesthood. The doctrines that came to are basically false. That's where it naturally leads. And so it's not, that's where I think is that people are like, this isn't like some issues where it's like, oh, we can agree to disagree. It's like, okay, if you take this thing and you naturally go down to logic of it, it's like this, you're basically saying that we have no valid priesthood. And so I get that. It's not like it's that saying, it's basically saying, like, even if you don't directly say it, it's having a statement that's basically says, oh, your church has no valid priesthood. That's not a thing where they can be like, oh, we can just agree to disagree, or we can have all of our opinions and stuff. Like, that's one of those things where it's okay. This is something where I get that. I get that why you can't be like teaching things where it's like, oh, you don't have any real priesthood. Like, I get why they would take that very seriously. But I mean, there are other things, like, here's an example, like Dan McClellan, who says things that's like, where like, I think are pretty like, I want to be nice. He says things that are like, here's an example. He says things like, there is no evidence for the Book of Mormon's historicity, which the standard he's doing is like an academic one where it's like, would it pass the Smithsonian? Well, no, it wouldn't pass the Smithsonian or a peer-reviewed article. Like, and I'll say that, I'll admit that. Which isn't, when LDS people are talking about, most of them realize, okay, it wouldn't, but they would still say, well, there's these other reasons to believe just because, it wouldn't pass a peer-reviewed article or stuff. But like for example, he's still like, I think he's still a member. I know he is, and don't quote me on this, but I think he still has a temple. I think he does have a temple recommend. I could be wrong about that, but I think he does. But just saying that, that's kind of an example of someone where, like, yeah, he's going way off the orthodoxy bounds, but he's still a member in good standing, which I do think that shows that there is, it's not like, yeah, there are places where the church draws a hard line where it's like, okay, like the polygamy denial thing for reasons I said, but there's also like ways where they're like, okay, they'll allow, okay, you can be a member in good standing in this decent amount of latitude interpretation. So I just didn't do that. So it's not like anything goes, but it's also not like there's this, you got to be within the strict orthodoxy standard or you're excommunicated. It's not like that either. So I think that's anything for to address with that.
Yeah, and so you kind of touched on this, and this was one of our common questions, and people feel free and bring up questions for our LDS panel members, or Matt or I. We've got quite a swath of representation here. But Skinkenstein asks, would he'd like to hear treatment on what it means that Joseph Smith restored temple authority? Because that was part of the temple interview questions, like one of the orthodoxy kind of questions, one of those. Probably most members would agree to that. What does that mean?
And may I just add a bit of seasoning to that question, given that I apologize, I don't see people's names. The individual who's to my across. He's across from me, not above me. Yeah,
Daniel and Daniel.
There we go.
Yeah.
There's names again.
Daniel, you said that there's latitude in how that particular question can be orthodoxly answered. And I'm just wondering, could you give us examples of like boundary markers of where you could go left and right, to just so we get like a spectrum of how that can be, how that is addressed and still keeps you in good, where you still get the temple recommend.
Yeah. Of the different ways it can be interpreted.
Yeah, it's still like the different valid ways, I suppose.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, I would actually say a little bit of a correction with that is that, well, I know the person said temple authority. Well, really, we'd say it. I mean, the temple is obviously a huge connector with that, but it'd be priesthood authority, and the priesthood's a part. The temple's a part of the priesthood, but it's not the full thing. So, anyway, that just like that's sort of like this. Well, I mean, I would say, but that's sort of like helps with the broader thing with that. But the idea with the priesthood authority is that basically it's sort of like, again, like God's basically a sort of, well, here's how I described it in my mission. At least kind of a basic thing, at least the conceptions of it, is that it's sort of like if it's sort of like God, the authority to act in God's name to perform certain ordinances and hold certain callings and stuff. So it's sort of like, again, the way I described it when I was on my mission, which I still think is fairly accurate, is it's sort of like if you you're driving, you're speeding down the road, and let's say that there's some guy who came up and he wasn't a cop, and he came up and he saw you speeding, and he's like, hey, you're speeding, I'm gonna give you a ticket. But they're like, well, you're not a cop, so you can't. But I saw you breaking the law, I give you a ticket. Well, the reason why is because you weren't given the authority to do that, so they're not gonna even if you technically were speeding. Or the other one that I would use is like if a lawyer saw you speeding and he tried to give you a ticket. And the lawyer might know way more about the law than the police officer. But he still can't really give you a ticket because he doesn't have the authority. So that's sort of like where it is. And and I know it's very sort of like Catholic adjacent. But I mean, again, we kind of get, and obviously LDS conception of priest and Catholic conception isn't like identical. But they're both similar places where we get these ideas. Like, I mean, again, it's not want to overstate this, because we're not like, oh, we have the same conception of priesthood, but we get some of our ideas in very similar places in there about the idea of that, where they'll also talk about, their church authority and stuff like that, and the importance of the Catholic Church's authority. And then we'll still talk about the authority so that's kind of like where it says our idea, which this is where the Catholics would be like, what? Where what we would say is that the authority was lost in the apostasy, where basically like, and it's a complex topic, which I guess we can go into more if you want, where basically the authority was lost from the earth because a lot of the truths, we're not saying that they were all lost, because people really overstate this. Like, we're not saying like there were no true believers in Christ or all truth was lost, but saying that, like, because here's the thing, if you look at Christianity, here's the way I look at it. Although I'm getting into a whole different subject and a tangent with this, so maybe okay. So I'm going to try to keep this brief. But
it's related. The apostasy is the other bookend of
in creedal tradition. The way creedal Christians, which is most Christians, would look at it, is that when Christ left, you see all these different like Christian factions having all these ideas, and a lot of them will be like, "Oh, these are all heretics everywhere," and the creeds really put down the truth of the gospel and got rid of all the heresies. Oh, most of the heresies, not all of them, but like, a lot of the heresies, and they got them down, and we kept the truth, and it never left, all that kind of stuff. And the way LDS would look at that is like, well, that's the winners write history kind of perception. We would look at that and we'd say, well, now we wouldn't say we don't disagree with that. There's lots in the creeds we would agree with. So there's again this overstated when people, in fact, when I looked at the Nicene Creed, I'd say we agree with almost all of it. Like the one part where we would use the co-substantial part, but then even then, if you interpret it a certain way or loosely, not the traditional way, we could kind of, but once you get into like the Athanasian Creed, but what we would say is like, well, that's very winners write history. We would say the creeds got a lot right, but there were some fundamental things that they got wrong. And so those core truths were lost and some things like that. And then that's when the restoration needed to happen. So we kind of take the approach where it's like, well, no, the creeds didn't get everything right. And there were things that they did get wrong. And part of that is part of why. And it's not like everyone was bad. Can people, again, overstate this and like, well, you think everyone was wicked and bad and stuff. It's like, no, but thought that there were some really core things that they got wrong and core aspects that they got wrong. And so like, some truth was taken out and needed to be brought back. And so that's sort of related again to priesthood, where like the priest was brought back to the earth and so that authority to act in God's name, along with like the full, like the doctrine with that kind of thing.
So what?
So it would sort
So
of be
specifically authority, like to do what? Can you kind of break it down? Because I think
sacrament.
is
Oh,
it
sorry.
different people have different authority to do different things in the
Yeah,
LDS?
there's less to that. So there would be I mean, well, for things like or things like or communion is how most people say the ability to do communion, to administer it properly, or to do baptisms. And those would sort of be like, so we also have, and here's another way we really differ from the Catholics in our conception of priesthood. So you have two different divisions. Well, there's one where there's the Aaronic priesthood, which is sort of like a lower, it's like a lower level priesthood, and a Melchizedek priesthood, which is a higher level. But the understanding is always like the Aaronic is a preparatory priesthood, which means if you get the Aaronic priesthood, there's always the understanding, okay, you're just getting this to eventually get the Melchizedek priesthood. It's basically sort of like, okay, this is like your preparation priesthood, and you know, if you're 12 years old, if you're like born into the church, you're 12 years old, you get it, and then when you're 18, you get Melchizedek, or if you're a convert, you get Aaronic for a year, and then if you're, you know, you work with that well, you'll get Melchizedek. So I know that like in the Catholic Church, they just think there's just one priesthood. Ours is sort of like, well, really, even the Aaronic is just sort of like, yeah, this is just sort of preparation. It's not like you get Aaronic and you never get. There's always the understanding you'll get Melchizedek, but it's sort of like there's certain things you can do with the Aaronic priesthood. Again, like the baptism, you can baptize with the Aaronic priesthood. You can do communion with the Aaronic priesthood. You have certain kinds of authority of certain like elements of teaching with the Aaronic priesthood. But then the Melchizedek is sort of like, okay, that's where you can confirm the Holy Ghost with the Melchizedek priesthood. You can do the temple ordinances with the Melchizedek priesthood.
What do you mean by that? Confirm the Holy Ghost?
Like when you say like when they say like baptism, like when John the Baptist talked about you're born with water and a fire. The fire is sort of like you're giving him the gift of the Holy Ghost. And so when you have the Melchizedek, that's the part is someone with a Melchizedek priesthood gives the gift of the Holy Ghost. Although the Melchizedek priesthood can do everything the Aaronic priesthood can do, but not the Aaronic priesthood can do everything the Melchizedek priesthood can do. Okay. But and then the mechanics of it, I mean, there's some, you know, technicalities and all that kind of stuff with it. But again, that's sort of like the conception. And the conception is like, well, that's what the LDS Church holds. Something that's actually really interesting, that this is another hard boundary with it, is this actually ends up going a little bit into Mormon fundamentalism, where the LDS Church, when it stops saying, which is a whole other complicated topic, but where it stops saying, okay, we're not going to continue to do plural marriage through the church. And when they really cracked down on it, which was about 1904, 1905. And then there are other people who are like, well, no, we're going to keep doing it. So what those people did is they have this, and a lot of them still do this. They have this really weird, this interesting thing where they'll still say the LDS Church is still the true church of God on the earth, even though they've gone to apostasy. They'll still say he still is. What they'll say is that it's because they hold certain keys. They still hold like missionary keys, and they still hold the keys to do certain to do like sort of like the churchy stuff. But they said, but what we're going to do is we have to break off, and we've got to have our own. We have the keys to. They'll say that we have, obviously the LDS Church very much disagrees with this. They'll say we have the keys to like the higher priesthood, the higher way, like which includes things like. This includes things like plural marriage, and includes like a deep doctrine. They'll say like, well, what they would say is like, well, what we want you to do is we want you to go to the LDS Church, you know, get what they have, and then after you're done with them, come back to us, and we'll give you the higher. And the LDS Church does not like that. They do not like the idea of being the stepping stone. So actually, one of the questions in the Temple Recommends, and they put this in because of the Mormon fundamentalists doing this, is, do you believe that the current LDS prophet holds all the keys to the priesthood? And the reason why is because the fundamentalists, the people, and by the way, clarify, Mormon fundamentalists aren't just FLDS. There's lots of different Mormon fundamentalist groups. That's just the one that gets all the attention because they're the most scandalous. They're the ones who like believe, okay, you know, so they'll say like, oh well, because the LDS, according to the LDS prophet still holds all the keys, at least as far as like the church goes. But Mormon fundamentalists will be like, oh, he holds some of the keys, but not all the keys. And so that one is specifically made. Do you believe that the LDS prophet holds all the keys? That one was made specifically to weed out the fundamentalists from doing the whole like I'll go to the LDS church and learn what they know and then come to us. Which the LDS church is not like the idea of like, oh, we're just the stepping stone. So that's why they did that. I'm sorry, I went on a whole tangent here. What was the original question?
Maybe I can like also tie it a little bit back biblically to just help you understand the root of the LDS idea of priesthood. I think one of the clear examples is in the New Testament. Well, even starting back with Moses, right? There's this idea that Moses brought down the higher law from Mount Sinai to the children of Israel, but as they worshipped, engaged in idol worship, that law was destroyed, and he gave them a lesser law, lesser commandments that in some ways Christ came to fulfill that law and bring this higher law, right? That we're living than simply the laws of Moses. So we have this breakdown in the New Testament of John the Baptist, who is baptizing, but says there's one greater than me that's coming to baptize, not just with water, but with fire, right? And later in the New Testament, you also see the same breakdown when people are coming to the apostles and saying, we've already been baptized. And it's like, well, but have you been given the gift of the Holy Ghost yet? And then they say no. He's like, well, if you would have been baptized by John's baptism, then he would have been telling you to go to the source to get the gift of the Holy Ghost. So it probably wasn't a proper baptism. So they actually re-baptize as well. But then in addition to the baptism, they held that higher authority to lay on hands for the gift of the Holy Spirit, or gift of the Holy Ghost is the way we say it in LDS terminology, but Holy Spirit, Holy Ghost, same thing. So that's that breakdown of that lesser authority that it's Aaronic, or sometimes we call it Levitical priesthood, that we goes, harkens to the Old Testament. The children of Aaron, or the Levites, were operating the tabernacle, running that priesthood, and Christ brought and gave Peter, for example, the keys of the kingdom, which we would consider keys belonging to this higher order priesthood. And so you see that breakdown in the LDS church today. So the keys, the authority, the priesthood, they're all tied in this concept of governing God's order on church to unlock blessings to his children on earth is kind of the concept.
So there is something I kind of would like to go back to on the overall question of like where we had been on apostasy, and that kind of led into keys. There's one thing that, and number one, I'm just going to say this. I am not going to be accused of being the most orthodox LDS member. Like, that will never happen in my lifetime. The fruit's already there. But one of the things that is kind of my observation when, we say that Joseph was restoring something that was lost. Part of what he was restoring was the idea that the heavens are open and people part the veil, not just Joseph. And so when I think of the apostasy, I think of the closure of that, and the fact that like there came a time where nobody really actively knew how to part the veil and how to initiate others into parting the veil. And so that's the biggest thing that was in my mind being restored with Joseph, is that he had managed to part the veil. It had been revealed to him, and he was helping initiate others into also parting the veil. I've been preparing a copy of the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants for doing a small printing, just to have like a up-to-date version, but definitely based off of what's in the Joseph Smith Papers project. And kind of one of the big things with that I am noticing is how many of the revelations that are actually in the current Doctrine and Covenants attributed to Joseph are actually attributed to people who are not Joseph. And so, and I only mention that as an indication of this idea that the heavens are meant to be open and people are just meant to be able to access through the veil. You know, that's in the Nephi story, that's in the Abraham story, that's in the Jacob story. Like it's something that happens in the early Old Testament. It happens with the prophets. You know, we have Samuel, who he keeps waking up and hearing his name called, and he keeps going to Eli, and then Eli says, no, say, "Here I am, Lord, speak." And he is having a parting of the veil experience there. So when I think of the apostasy, I think of people losing that more than I think of actual authority to act. Because if the heavens are open, the Lord can just say, "Hey, you go do something." You know, and a lot of the prophets of the Old Testament it's just a guy who's given an unpopular message to go give to someone. It's not, you know, the leader of a hierarchy that usually gets the message. In fact, it's usually someone being sent to the leader of the hierarchy, being told, "Hey, Eli, your sons are all going to get killed because you haven't got them under control in the temple." Which, by the way, that story in the beginning of First Samuel is that's one of the things I ponder when I ponder, you know, the argument that polygamy denial means the whole church is invalid. You know, the Lord has had times when his leaders have done things that are wrong, and still somehow he is faithful to his people. But that I just wanted to throw that out there as a way for understanding what the apostasy is, because it's different if you're not just talking about it in terms of authority so much as in terms of access, parting the veil.
Yeah. Can I add to that too? Because I really like that. Like, because I think that's one thing to really understand, like in the mind of Joseph Smith, and really the message of the LDS Church is that access to heaven is open. I think that really is a differentiating factor, not only for, you know, prophets continually, but all of us have this ability to access heaven, and it's not closed, both in canon. But I'd also say that the revelations of Joseph Smith, he seemed to be, even if I was looking at it from an outside, like, historian perspective, he seemed to be obsessed with this idea of trying to, or having the audacity to try to bring heaven itself to earth. You know, the project again of a new Jerusalem, or bringing a Zion to earth, that promised Zion, a millennial reign of earth. That is something that we as humans are participating in preparation for the second coming of Christ. And I would say even theologically closing that gap, that's another, you know, big differentiator, is he went so far as to close what is typically the creator-creature gap, and even ontologically saying, you know, that ontology in the full revelation, actually we truly are made in the image of God, and we have the same ontology, that we are children of God in some almost literal sense, or the same type of being that he is in the most, you know, maybe more accurately. So again, whether it's theology or the way that we're approaching, and again, the temple itself, these are all mechanisms of trying to bring heaven and earth together. And I think that's really what the mission of the LDS faith or Mormonism could be summed up as, from one perspective.
I want to just add that to one thing that you said as well about the temple bringing that together. That is what is taught in the endowment. When someone goes through the temple and they do their, you know, higher ordinances there, you've got the washing and anointing, which is preparing you for the endowment. And then you have the endowment, which is, you know, it's taught as you're receiving various signs and tokens that you need to present on your return to God. And it is done by, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the play of Adam.
You should probably explain some of this, because I think when you say endowment, people are going to be a little bit lost. So baptism generally happens, did you say 12?
Baptism can happen at 8.
Oh, 8. I got that wrong. So 8, and then And then the next priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood, happens around, did you say 18?
Yes. Well, I mean, you can receive the Aaronic priesthood, which is primarily like a call to service type thing
Okay.
at 11. And
Okay,
then
so that's the step I'm missing. So baptism around 8, Aaronic priesthood a little bit later, around 11-ish. And then so where does, can you kind of lay out the steps in the progression in a person's life, and then where
so the milestones for doing these temple ordinances where you do the live session, or actually I missed the fact that we had live sessions. Now they're all videos.
because that's later, right? This is later.
This is usually something in preparation for going on a mission or getting married.
Okay.
That a person will do those, or sometimes people who are single adults will just decide, I want to go to the temple and have this experience, and at which point that also qualifies them for being a temple worker, so they can help other people go through that experience.
Okay, but the endowment is, so that's usually before you're going on your mission, 18.
Yes.
Can you also go through the endowment, and that's in the temple? Can you also go through that even if you don't serve a mission?
Yes.
Okay. So, but it's happening sometime around that age of life, or if you convert later in life. Sorry to interrupt, but I just kind of
that's it is an adult ordinance to do.
Okay.
You have to be an adult who is, living with a sufficient level of commitment that, like, yes, this is a thing I particularly want to go participate in.
And then
is a mystery initiation ritual.
Okay, you were summarizing that a bit. So because there's baptism and then receiving the Aaronic priesthood, which is later, and then you've mentioned the endowment now and the receiving the Holy Ghost. So can you put all the pieces together for us? Put all the Legos together.
So the receiving the Holy Ghost, the confirmation, is that is actually done immediately after baptism. Hands are laid on the person's head, and they are, you can't force the Holy Ghost to be received by someone. You can tell them, now receive the Holy Ghost, but it is still up to that person to have the actual experience with the Holy Ghost, and that has more to do with the state of their heart than whether or not someone laid hands and commanded it. But yeah, so those ones are the primary ones as a child. I'm actually going to just disregard or like set aside the which priesthood and when, because that's kind of separate from the temple ordinances, because that's only applicable to the men and their service in the church. This thing with the washing and anointing and endowment is something that is, men and women together. Well, not together. They have the washing and anointings are separate areas for the men and for the women. And, but the point of the endowment is it's showing that process that a person is supposed to go through to part the veil and come back into the presence of the Lord. Like it is demonstrating, it is telling the story of Adam going through that process and receiving messengers and learning things along the way. And then, he is introduced into kind of this intermediate world where he has access to the veil and is then able to commune with the Lord at the veil. Which
are you also making covenants during the endowment?
Yes, there are distinct covenants that are made during that time, and really each of those covenants are a lot of it really is like living in the way that you need to live in order to be a person who is ready to part the veil and commune with the Lord. So it's the covenants you have to make for you to behave yourself as an individual and for you to behave yourself in the way that is required to support wider community in order for the whole community to be in a state that the Lord can abide with the people. So But that's kind of the thing that is being demonstrated in that ordinance in the temple.
So what I hear you saying is that LDS are charismatic and nationalistic. Christian
I don't
nationalistic.
know about nationalistic. I'm
Well,
really
like-
leading heavy on the Christ coming is going to be the end of all nations.
Okay.
But we don't need any central power. His pattern seemed to do oddly well with distributed local configurations of organization.
Anything to tag onto there? Any extra questions? I kind of want to take us to the beginning of our conversation again. Go back to the meta conversation,
Sure.
but I don't want to interrupt us if we want to keep going with this.
That's fine. I think that was a lot of information to dump on people that are not LDS.
That was. You almost need a whole stream of just walking through that, because even though I've been in conversation, like even I don't have all this stuff straight.
Yeah. So
Enjoy
I
the
think
fire hose.
it's good to take a step back and just go to somewhere that's like a little stepping stone before jumping into too much.
Yeah. Well, I kind of wanted to show something that relates to the mission a bit. I think there was a poll that someone put in the Thoughtful Saints group, and I thought it was a really good poll. But the poll was asking about how were interactions with different faith traditions outside your own on your mission. So, and it didn't surprise me a lot. There were a few surprises, but I kind of wanted to hear your guys' perspective on this, and like why the poll turned out the way it was and what your experiences have been. So let me just show this. The question was, for those who served a mission, which Christian group generally led to your least pleasant interactions? And then I haven't, this isn't the most up-to-date result of the poll, but at the time when I screenshotted it, evangelicals were by far the most unpleasant. And then with Baptist non-denominational, which technically you might be able to group a lot of those together. And then Jehovah's Witness, but those are the main. But my group fared by far as the most unpleasant interactions for people on their mission.
I would wonder. See, that's got me wondering. I mean, how many folks on mission engage with like an Eastern Orthodox, for instance? Because I would imagine they'd have negative experiences with them. But would you list them if you didn't see them? You probably weren't sent in that area, so they wouldn't be on your radar, and maybe you would be sent somewhere where there's more Western flavors, right? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, it depends on where you go. Like, again, missions are worldwide. So, like, I mean, you could be, like, if you're going to, like, theoretically a missionary in Greece, you could go to, like, a lot of, obviously Greek Orthodox. But, again, if you're someone like me, I mean, I went my mission in Detroit, Michigan. Yeah, there's not a lot of Eastern Orthodox in Detroit, Michigan. So, you're right. For me, I wouldn't have had that experience with them. So, I mean, it really depends. I mean, a missionary in Greece, they probably would have plenty of chances, or somewhere where there's Orthodoxy more predominant. But I think, at least as for as I go, my experience with it goes, I think, well, the obvious answer is that evangelicals, again, typically tend to be the most aggressive, at least, again, broadly speaking. So they're going to be who most likely come out and use like, hey guys, aren't you the guys who think that Satan and Jesus are brothers? The ones are most likely to come at you and be like, and the thing about it as a missionary, now, as a member, I would be willing to like go at them more and be like there. But as a missionary, your job, you're really at the bottom line. What you're supposed to be doing is finding people who are like eventually interested in converting, to be honest. And then, you're talking, if you spend a lot of time, arguing with these people, it's sort of considered a waste of time. So you're just like, well, you just, stop it. But that's probably where the most unpleasant things. But here's the thing, though. Another conversely thing to that is I don't think missionaries, at least typically, spend a lot of time talking to people who are very firmly planted in a particular faith tradition, because here's the thing. When I was a missionary, and I think figure this out, there's almost nothing that like really predicts whether someone's really going to be interested in Mormonism. Like, at least I had this idea which is totally off. For our mission, is like, oh, you know what, the people who like, which I cringe at my pre-mission ideas now, but like I had this idea, like, oh, someone who like, oh, it pains me even saying this, but like someone who's like, oh, like they already live sort of like the lifestyle, or kind of might already live the word of wisdom or the law of chastity. They just sort of need the extra stuff, so they don't have to go. And I cringe thinking that now, because like that was so wrong. Because there are so many people who are like, again, I was in Detroit, Michigan. There are some people who are like, oh my gosh, they have their drugs and their alcohol, who like they hear, and they're like, and they even struggle, but they're so interested, and they're like, oh my gosh, they're really into it. And there are other people who like are like, yeah, they're pretty sober, they don't do any drugs and stuff, but they'd be talking about, they have no interest in it at all. So like, I mean, that's just one example. There's really nothing that I feel like really was like, oh, that's a marker of that person would or wouldn't be interested, except if someone already has a pretty firm, pretty substantial faith commitment, belief tradition. That's the one thing. And even that wasn't always absolute, but I think that would be the one thing where, like, if someone's already pretty firmly Baptist or Catholic or even, some other religion that's not there, they're a lot less likely to be like really interested. So I feel like you could say, like, what kind of religion are you talking to most? Well, really the one that you're probably talking to most are the people who just aren't as committed or aren't as like firmly planted, because those are the people who might be more like, yeah, I could use some of that, or I could be, or at least most likely to be that, into someone who's like, already has that somewhere else. And they're like, no, I'm good. Like, those are probably the people who are like, if you're already like really, committed Catholic, you're probably not as interested in another faith tradition that offers some of these things. But if you're someone who's like, or let's say if you're like a lapsed Catholic, you're someone who's like, yeah, I haven't been to church, and like, my dad's Catholic and I wasn't there for fun, but I'm trying to look for something. You haven't thought about Catholicism much. Yeah, maybe then you're more likely to be interested. But if you're like really committed, and again, even then, I don't want to say that's an absolute, but I'd say that's the one thing where it's sort of like, so when you ask that poll, I also think that missionaries typically talk to people who aren't, don't have really strong faith commitments or faith roots, because they already have it. So they're sort of like, well, I'm not as interested in what you're offering. But people who are like, kind of like, they believe, but they're looking, and they're like, those are the people who are probably going to be most likely to, not saying they don't have anything, no Christian belief at all, but they're not like firmly planted in a tradition.
Are you saying, Daniel, that evangelicals / charismatics are less likely to just kind of be passively, or least likely even, by these polls, like the different flavors that you see here, to be kind of half in, half out, just kind of
that's
navigating that? Like, they're most likely to be committed to that faith community, to that religion, right? Is that
maybe. Well, I think that the reason why they're the most is because they're the most aggressive. I think that's the reason why they came up there. Again, I'm painting with a broad brush, but anytime you talk about a group, you're painting with a broad brush. But they're the ones who are the most likely. Like, I think that, your typical Catholic, even committed Catholics, not saying this never happens, but I think that they're a lot less likely to come up to you and be like, hey, which is interesting, since the Catholic Church is the one who, at least traditionally, think that the priest, you don't agree with, the Nicene. Well, we agree with most of it. Maybe Athanasian might be a better example. You don't agree with the Athanasian Creed. Well, then you're going to hell, even if they think that. But most of them won't. The ones who are really going to come up to you and say this most of the time and be like really aggressive in your face, or they'll be like, sit down, let's talk. Like, we're like, they talk, and really when they talk, they want to like argue with you. Like, those, again, I'm painting with a broad brush, so I do want to put that disclaimer in there. But when we're talking about groups, kind of do that. The evangelicals, charismatics seem to be the ones that are most likely to do that, which is probably why they're the least pleasant interactions. Yeah. But in another way, I also think that they're one of the ones most likely to interact, because they're the ones who are like trying to like do it. But again, if other traditions are like, if someone's like, again, I'm doing, again, kind of generalizations here, but when you think about like a committed Catholic, like they're probably not going to be necessarily really interested in what you have to say, but they're also not like necessarily, again, broadly speaking, to go out and like really want to like throw down with you and be like, oh, this is why it's wrong, and be there. So they're most likely to like not interact with you at all, unless like, you know, but then like an evangelical might still really want to interact with you, just not for reasons that you will enjoy necessarily. So again, painting with a broad brush. Again,
yeah. May I ask a question? I've never had a chance to ask something like this, but if an evangelical / charismatic, this is for the panel, if one of those, someone from that section of that flavor, that ice cream flavor of Christianity, if they knocked on your door on mission and they wanted to share the truth of Jesus Christ with you, they wanted to share the gospel with you, that's what they said. And how likely would you be to have do you think that you'd have a pleasant interaction with them if they were at your door?
Well, for me, I think I would enjoy it because I actually enjoy these kind of debating sort of things.
Yeah.
I enjoy getting into that. I enjoy it when I don't even care if you agree with me. I just like to debate you. So that's me. But you know, here's the thing. And again, this is a broad brush thing, and I'm against the broad brush in this. But again, culturally, LDS tends to be very non-confrontational. I think a lot of it comes from, there's this verse in the Book of Mormon where Jesus is teaching and he says, "He who has a spirit of contention is not of me, but is of the devil, who is the father of contention," and some other things. Anyways, so basically, I think a lot of them they're like, "Oh, we shouldn't have contention," which I think sometimes LDS takes that too far. But like, I think a lot of it comes from that, and so they're like, "Oh, we don't want to do that," and like that sort of thing. So a lot of times they don't really enjoy. A lot of LDS wouldn't really enjoy them saying we want to tell you. But like, here's the other thing. I think that would be a very ineffective approach, because here's the thing. Even as a missionary, like the way you get people to really, and not even just LDS, any religion, reason why people convert to your faith or any faith is because they feel, I mean, like even if we take out, you know, truth claims, they feel some sort of connection to it. They feel something that draws them to it. You know what doesn't draw people to it? When people come to your house and say, "Hey, I'm right and you're wrong, and here's the reasons why." Like, that's the whole reason why day one in the MTC, they tell you, do not do that. Do not, they call it Bible bashing or stuff, because you know what? Saying I'm right, you're wrong, that is like the number one way to turn people off from ever wanting to listen to anything you say. Like, I know apparently there's some people think it's a great way, but I mean, it's really not. So even if you do think I'm right, you're wrong, that is probably the most worst way to go about it. If you want to go back, what you do is you say, "Hey, here's our message," and obviously not everybody can connect, but you find something in there where it's like, "Hey, this is something in your life. This is something that really can connect with you, that really resonates with you." Like even my wife, who's a convert to the LDS Church, she said the thing that really connected with her initially is when she heard the conception, the LDS conception of the plan of salvation, because her cousin died recently before then. And hearing the ideas like, "Oh, well, you know, there's still a chance in like the next life. It's not like she's doomed forever." So that's something that really connected with her and resonated with her. That's like, "Oh, this isn't like forever doomed." Like that's an example of something like, oh, like they didn't go in there because she was raised Catholic, and they didn't come in there and say, "Hey, you know what? The Catholic Church fell into apostasy and you're wrong." Like that wasn't it. It was like, no, so that's not the angle that came from. So yeah, I think evangelical came in and like their approach, which I think this is a major weakness, again, hitting with a broad brush, many of them have, is they think that if they just come in and they like, you know, throw down on the false religions, it's not gonna do that. It's gonna turn people off. What it does is like say, "Hey, this is something that is gonna help connect with you, your faith." And I think that's why some people get really turned off by that, is it's this throwing down and hellfire, and you're right and you're wrong. That's something that just a lot of people do not like. So
maybe asked from a different angle, you guys might have a better experience if a Catholic or an Eastern Orthodox or a Seventh-day Adventist was knocking on your door. You might
Yeah, I
have
would say that's probably
but
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't bad the day that I had some Jehovah's Witnesses at my door. So I just kind of have fun whenever I'm talking to anyone of a different tradition. You know, like it's not that I'm trying to mess with anyone, but it is fun to just kind of plumb the depths of like, well, where's everyone at on, you know, these various topics? And you know, I was reading a lot of libertarian philosophy at the time, and I felt like it was somewhat of an accomplishment to get Jehovah's Witnesses to defend needing government to build roads. But there they were defending it, and I'm like, okay,
nice. That is an accomplishment.
Yeah, for me, I don't know. I feel like I haven't had a bad experience like that. I think by my temperament, I'm a little bit turned off by like debate and just kind of like that ego intention. And so I don't think I'm drawn to that type of interaction. It just probably ends almost immediately if it were to go there. My experience with even people that I've spoken with evangelical has been pretty positive. I would say overall, like what interests me most, because maybe I have a little bit of different conception, but I see most of Christianity as basically being on my team, if you want to put it that way. I see us as being on the same side. And so I love to hear like a different worldview. And, you know, even if I don't even share my view, it really interests me to hear like where somebody genuinely is feeling their faith and where it comes from and where it motivates them, and to try to understand their worldview. And my experience has been when I allow people to speak their heart, I usually come away with something that I learned that I find valuable. And I feel closer to that person. And so that's like my mindset when if somebody were to come to my door, and I don't know if I've had an evangelical come to my door, but whether it's online or when I come across people, that's generally what I'm imagining is going to happen. And often I feel like I do have that experience. So maybe I've just been lucky, but I feel like I get a unity with people when I get to speak with them like that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We're having kind of our Mormon moment right now in the Protestant world, where, because just like you described, like we would see Orthodox as like we're on the same team. You know, we might not agree about everything, but we're on the same team. And now we're getting some kind of messages back, which is interesting when you see it that way. And then you're getting messages back that it's like, well, we don't see that we're on the same team. You know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it's a weird, and I'm not sure we're used to getting that, you know, in our little neck, you know, a part of the world, because we didn't have much interaction with Orthodox or in Catholics post Vatican II. It hasn't really been like that. So I don't know, what is it like for you guys when sometimes you're interacting with another church group or tradition like we've talked about, and they don't see it the same way you do?
So for me, number one, I find it interesting. You know, I go back to Jesus saying, if ye are not one, ye are not mine. And but at the same time, or at least in the next breath, I will frequently say, yes, but there's nothing more Christian than a good schism. And that's how we know that Mormons are Christians, because I don't know if you realize how many schismatic Mormon groups there are. There are so many.
Yeah,
like there's even one that is the Joint Conference of Restoration Branches, implying that this is actually an aggregation of multiple groups that are all separate in their own way for their own reasons. So, you know, we're just being like everyone else. But that being said, you know, it's always a difficult thing trying to figure out how to get along with people. You know, I have 2 kids. You would think that with only 2, we could figure out how to get everyone to get along, but that is simply not how it works. I have no idea what our Father is thinking when he looks at us and is like, oh yeah, that's probably about right. That the billions of us are struggling to get along the way that we are. But what I go back to that, if ye are not one, ye are not mine, in my overall like real approach, not when I'm trying to joke about it or anything. It's I don't want to be the cause for disunity, though I recognize that somebody might bring that to the table. And so, there's a lot of trying to give everyone enough room to have what they believe. And, that's part of the beauty of at least my belief in trying to seek the Lord directly, because we don't all have to agree. We just have to seek him, and he can explain it to us if we are seeking properly. And so we don't have to worry about correcting each other, because that's not our job.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the Finnish Lutheran church that I was at this morning, they were giving a sermon. I think the guy was speaking Swedish, and it was being translated to English. And because their mother church is in Sweden, they're Lutheran, but not traditionally, not like a Lutheran church you think of. They're very elder driven. It's very similar to LDS church or Catholic, but it was from John 21, I think, where Jesus is restoring Peter, and at one point Peter's like, well, what about that guy? What's going to happen to him? And Jesus is like, you don't need to worry about that. I've given you your marching orders. Feed my sheep. And I think that kind of hit home for me, is that all the religious debating online, I think it's okay to compare ideas and talk honestly about where there's disagreement. But I agree with you, Sean. I think we spend too much time worrying about things that are outside of our boundaries, trying to fix everybody else, rather than me getting my steps in order, or the congregation that I'm a part of fostering what Christ wants in that congregation. I'm too busy worried about what the Orthodox think about icons or whatever.
Hey, just real quick, just let you guys know, I've got to head out right now. I'm getting called out, but I appreciate you guys letting me be here.
Yeah, it was great meeting you. Thanks for participating.
I wonder, may I say, like, because I'm feeling that there's a tension between this idea of the restoration, the apostasy and the restoration, and this idea of, don't worry, like, I've given you your marching orders. Don't worry about if those other people, they might also have my marching orders. They're just different marching orders. Do you know what I mean? And I'm just wondering how to tease that apart a little bit more. Maybe that's part of the creative latitude that Daniel was speaking to about how to interpret the restoration.
So that sense of seek the Lord, like, I think it really does rely on, people seeking and finding. Like, where my faith has ended up is in a place where I really believe that parting the veil is a thing that is possible for anyone to do. That doesn't mean I figured out how to do it, but I do believe that it is a thing that is possible to do. And it only works if people that you're dealing with are parting the veil. And so in my mind, the thing to convince people of is, well, you should try to part the veil too, not you should believe in this list of doctrines that matter. And because if people show up and are trying to actually, part the veil, see the face of the Lord in the way that happens, they can be instructed on anything that is necessary in the process of doing that or after. And we don't have to worry about how correct they are along the way, because when it matters, it will be corrected, because we learn line upon line.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very just to reiterate what you're saying, or to rephrase what you're saying, your emphasis, the way you're thinking about it, is that focus on our direct and personal relationship with God, and putting the bulk of that heavy lifting on his shoulders to guide and direct people to the correct place where they should be.
Yeah. And, in my own journey and path, like I have actually been, I was actually discouraged by my bishop on trying to seek the way that I have been seeking. But at the same time, I have looked at it and I've said, okay, well, am I going to trust an ecclesiastical leader, or am I going to trust in God and what I see in the scriptures? Like, am I going to trust him when he says that he's going to lead me the right way? And am I going to trust him that he'll be able to figure out how to get through to me if I'm taking a wrong turn? Because I know I'm taking wrong turns from time to time.
And that's one thing I really appreciate about my Calvinist brothers, is they seem to have a radical trust in God to take care of that stuff. Even if I'm not Calvinist and don't share those views, I do see the fruit of that in them. It's like, man, these guys really trust God to sort everything out.
Maybe that's part of your heterodoxy, Sean, that you alluded to, or at least part of your unusual flavoring.
I have spent a number of years where I had thought of myself as a heretic, but decided to stop holding up that label anymore. But it is difficult, because I feel like I'm trying to go for what was going on when Joseph was alive, because I feel like some of it's missing today. But I'm also trying to go for what was going on when Moses was around, because there's even that story in Exodus where people come to Moses saying, we've got men who are prophesying. And Moses replies, would that every man be a prophet?
And apologies that I had to go dark for a little while. I had a child with a tantrum, so had to attend to that.
That's okay.
So might be a little lost in the conversation, but I'll try to jump back in where I can.
Yeah, let me see. I've got a couple quick questions that you guys could answer in the comments. Let me scroll back to them. I think one was about Halloween.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, I don't know. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I would say from the typical American perspective, I haven't seen a unique relationship with Halloween. I feel like that might be more like Jehovah's Witnesses with the holidays and that. I have seen, maybe like some stricter LDS families like saying, don't dress in things that are like more of the demonic type, or like trying to be a little bit more restrictive. But there's going to be a wide gamut of perspectives on that. There's no official relationship that's unique, I think, with Halloween. Maybe we eat more candy than we should.
Any unique costumes? Any LDS costumes?
There probably is. I haven't done anything specifically LDS related, I don't think, in my costumes in the past. Trying to think back. No Joseph Smith costumes. I'm sure there has been Book of Mormon heroes though in costumes. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I'm sure that's a thing.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just saw it pop up in the chat. No harvest festivals as counter celebrations. There is totally at the church, when we have the fall party, it is not a Halloween party, though it is timed just right for Halloween, and it frequently is a fall festival or some other name that is not Halloween. So that totally does happen officially when it's a church activity.
Just like the evangelical / charismatics.
I mean,
I often think you guys. I often think that LDS. I mean, if you've got similarities with anyone, it's with the evangelical charismatics, which is probably where the tension comes from, because you're bumping up. You're. I mean, what does evangelical mean? Like you're on a mission to share the gospel, and you're not just keeping it in your house and keeping quiet about it.
well,
You're going global with it, and so are the evangelicals. So you're bumping up, elbow to elbow with people who have a very similar outlook.
Deep down, my observation of LDS culture is that subconsciously we really, really, really want to be Protestants, because
evangelicals specifically.
Yeah. Come on,
because
I'm Protestant. Remember, I'm not evangelical. We established that.
Well, and that may be me being imprecise in my terms, because I have not plumbed the depths of dividing them all. Maybe if I was like getting ready to fight more of them for whatever reason, I would figure out what those differences are so I could really stick it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not here for
you're
that.
onto something there, though. Yeah, it's like the U.S. versus England. It's not going to be the U.S. versus like Czechoslovakia. Like it's often your cousin, where you just have like these few things, and then it rubs you the wrong way, where you get in the biggest fights. So it makes sense.
Well, and I think as evangelicals, big evangelicals, we haven't done it. Like, I don't even think most of my tribe realizes where we're similar or how similar we are.
For sure.
When missionaries come to our doors, I think generally we don't even have a clue who they are, like what context of life they are. It's just, here's someone from this other group, and I was told certain things about them. Yeah. And then evangelicals, we don't go on a mission, but it is hammered into our heads that the Great Commission, we're supposed to always be about that, and we always feel guilty that we're not doing it enough. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's not formal like a mission, but it's informal, and supposed to be our whole lives, what we're all about. And then now
you're very likely supporting some mission overseas.
Oh yeah, definitely.
There's some way where that's being transferred, where you are participating, at least financially.
You've gone on short-term missions. Yep. Our saints tend to be missionaries. Those are like the highest level of Christian would be a missionary in the evangelical mindset.
Yep.
So we're very like mission oriented, and then when a missionary comes to our door, it's like we've been kind of like, I think we just tend to run our programming. We've taught like they're wrong about these certain beliefs, and that then the way that we're going to reach out to them is then correct those misbeliefs.
Yeah.
And I agree that definitely doesn't work. And it just communicates. One thing, you don't get to know the other person as a person. You don't ever get to know where they're coming from or what they believe. And you only communicate that evangelicals like to argue, which is maybe not the primary thing you want to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
This is an interesting question here. What's the value of the discipline of historical theology in Mormonism? How worthwhile is it to read Augustine or Aquinas or Calvin?
Yeah. Well, I think I personally find those things really valuable, but I think in the LDS culture and like the faith generally, those things are very underemphasized, I would say, compared to a lot of denominations. Again, leaning way more heavily into orthopraxy than orthodoxy. I think one of our blind spots is a bit of a lack of theological sophistication. And I'm sure that, lay members and every denomination are not going to be like experts on theology, but it's very common that I see like, a group of people that are going to theological seminary or people who are respected as the theologians or people to look to for those type of questions. And whereas, our highest leaders in the church right now, who are in the quorum of the 12 apostles, are often in their training, doctors or lawyers or judges or, or businessmen, and not trained theologians. So I think there would be a tremendous value in it. And I think there is for some LDS people who would just take that upon themselves as an endeavor. But I think you will find that most LDS people you ever come across are going to be really ignorant or not have a good conception of what might be coming from Aquinas or Augustine or Calvin, or like even the difference between Calvinism versus Arminianism. Like those things are not going to be in the typical parlance of an average LDS member that you come across.
It is a little bit tragic. Because
is it though? Because why would you need to know?
Well, I am going to say this, not specifically that this has to do with now I did read a good portion of the City of God back in the day, and I found that valuable. But I know that some say this guy's a heretic as well, but I'm also an appreciator of Richard Rohr, and it's actually from some of his teaching that I finally understood grace. I didn't get it from the LDS teaching. I did not get it from our specific set of, the way it's taught in our general conference or the way it's taught in our materials. I had to hear it from a Catholic, apparently, for it to really land in my heart. And I had to hear it the different way that he talked about it for it to really impact me and set me on a course to where it really, really mattered. And so, it's things like that, because I am a great appreciator of a number of Catholics. I really enjoy the work of Thomas Merton. And this gets back to that thing from earlier of, if ye are not one, ye are not mine. I am looking wherever I can for the breadcrumbs that are going to actually get me into that experience with God that I'm looking for. And, yes, it's kind of put me a little bit, not completely in line with exactly what some of my leaders want me to be doing all the time. But at the same time, I can't put that responsibility on someone else who's writing the manuals that I consume. I have to go digging. I have to mine through whatever I can find to get that next, that next clue or that next pointer that is helping me as I seek and hopefully find. And so it's very different. And this is a thing that is one of my frustrations in the LDS church, which is there's this attitude that we've got the truth, the whole truth, and there's not enough. We have everything that's necessary, and other people don't. We don't need what they've got. And that last part isn't stated openly, but it's kind of implied in the culture.
And I thought that was understood. Yeah, I thought that was explicit, but maybe.
Well, okay, maybe it's more explicit than I hope to admit, but
my experience is that LDS, at least in the last few decades, 30, 40, 50 years, are much fairly ecumenical. One of my favorite saints, Saint C.S. Lewis, is quoted a lot in General Conference.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, when you get things right, you get things right.
And I think that harkens back a little bit more to like the LDS founding. Like Joseph Smith was real, and even Brigham Young were very big on this. Like search the earth and gather the truth wherever it may be found. Like that was even one of Brigham Young's big things. Like Mormonism is supposed to be truth, and so it doesn't matter if it's coming out of the mouth of a Presbyterian or a Methodist or whoever. Like if it's truth, it's truth, and if it's truth, then it's good, and we want it to be part of what we have. So this idea of gathering truth from wherever it may be found was kind of a really central tenet, I would say, of the foundation of Mormonism. But as the centuries have gone on and trying to draw boundaries and trying to get a people on the same page as it's grown to millions of people, I think has led to an era that they call correlation, and where things have become a little bit more tightened and trying to get people to look more from approved sources. And I think in that an unintentional side effect has been to become a little bit more insular and stray a little bit from those roots that was supposed to be way more open-minded and gathering from wherever on earth we can find that truth.
So I have expressed this frustration about correlation in the past. But the frustration is that correlation's stated purpose is to kind of distill the essence of the gospel so that we have something that is, definitely the right way to do it. But my frustration is that in the process of trying to distill it, in some ways they have boiled some of the life out of it.
And that correlation is official church efforts to have doctrine communicated in a orthodox.
Yeah. It has at times been the correlation department. Like they're actually just trying to make everything that is published all correlate together properly, so there are no contradictions.
Yeah.
But if for anyone who's comfortable with paradox, you're going to have contradictions. Like you're just going to have to live with the fact that from time to time a contradiction is going to slip through, and that's just going to have to be one of those mysteries that you're waiting on the Lord to help you understand, not something you just remove.
Welcome, Matt. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to speak to its benefit, though. Like one thing that is kind of amazing is that you can, jump over into like Bolivia or, someplace in Africa, and you're going to have essentially the same experience worldwide that you would in a congregation where we are, what we're experiencing now. It's going to be the same lesson, same topic, same type of discussions. And so I can see that there was this kind of necessary period in the growth of, to millions of members to try to get a unified people on the same page. But again, as we've discussed, I think there have been some downsides. And so I think some people are seeing like the last 10, maybe 20 years as kind of being, okay, there's this new phase where we're beginning to open back up, moving past maybe what was considered the correlation era of the church. And people are kind of hungry for, going beyond the most distilled, most basic, okay, here's what everybody can agree on. But now let's get back to like looking to the stars, maybe, looking for something higher again. And yeah, I see that happening in our culture.
Wow.
And sorry, Matt, I guess we had to formally get introduced to you.
So you guys were rolling. I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah.
And I'm on the evangelical side of the spectrum, so I do want to be more kind of like listening than interjecting. Although I do have some questions.
Cool.
If we're at a point for I asked a question in the chat specifically about post those first two founding generations. I'm not sure how you guys view the language, like Mormon heroes or Mormon saints. Just who are some of the characters that are kind of big in your guys' culture that we outside of that might not know, and kind of what their lives kind of represent or symbolize.
Like saints specifically since the restoration, since Joseph Smith to now, or even looking
I mean I'm familiar with names like Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, guys like that, but in the intermediary period, I'm just kind of curious who Are there figures that have kind of like really like distinguished themselves that that people look up to? I don't know, guys that have like achieved a level of like folk hero status within your
I'm
within
going to
your world.
say
Who's been your
someone
Who's been
who
your
might.
favorite president in your lifetime? Also, along with that question.
Okay.
I think
Your
someone who
LDS
like
president.
there are some thinkers who are people who have raised to a level of notoriety. Like Hugh Nibley is one that a lot of people still go back to, and like he's got things where like he gave a talk at a commencement ceremony at BYU, and it was, I think it was titled the robes of a false priesthood, wherein he like lays out this idea that like all of these things of the robes of the commencement ceremony are things that originated in a religious setting, in a priestly setting, that have now been handed down. But it's he was pointing out this juxtaposition of, we are a religious school, but we have these robes of a different priesthood we're all wearing to celebrate right now. So,
So he was a Mormon intellectual, like he could, I think he could read Egyptian. He could read many of the ancient languages. So somebody, well studied and became really popular. He's passed since, I think actually in the early 2000s, something like that. But yeah, he was really well known. I would say church presidents wise, there's a man, a church president in the, I think 50s roughly. His name is David O. McKay. He was somebody that was extremely charismatic, and everybody looked to as somebody like, okay, that seems like what I would expect a prophet to be. So especially for his time, he had a kindness and just charisma about him, that when he spoke, people listened and responded. So I think he reached that level of kind of like a lot of people's hero status. In more like my lifetime, I feel like a lot of people, there's something a little bit too like, I think whoever the prophet is when you're kind of a youth seems to really resonate with a lot of people. But from my era, it would have been President Hinckley, Gordon B. Hinckley, that people really, really respected him. Both, again, a natural charisma. He was really funny, often cracking jokes and in what seemed to be a serious setting. And so really endeared people to him. And then his example of like him and his wife, how much they really loved each other, like with a deep, like just the type of people that you would want to grow to be. I think especially in the LDS culture with such a heavy emphasis on family, seeing them as a couple with such a deep admiration for one another that you could just see in them, that made people respect them to a level I think that people saw them as heroes.
So another one that comes to mind that in some circles is still really looked back to is Ezra Taft Benson. Now there's a lot that like, he talked against communism and things like that. And, I think he would have had a lot to say about the postmodernists and everything that's been happening the last 10 years. But what's interesting is he renewed a notion that is found in the Doctrine and Covenants where, back before the saints came to Utah, it was declared in the Doctrine and Covenants, right, even before Joseph died, it was declared that the saints were under condemnation. And I believe it was in the 80s when Ezra Taft Benson actually indicated that that has not been lifted because we still are failing at parts of our mission. And I find that really interesting. But he's one that I don't know. He would at least be worth taking a look at, as far as like if someone might consider him in some elevated status among the others.
Mm-hmm.
Because of his hyper conservatism, there is some polarization around him and his legacy. But one thing that fundamentally shifted as a result of him was, again, this idea of condemnation. But he emphasized that one of the reasons was that we had not taken the Book of Mormon seriously enough. And I think up to that point in LDS history, even from the time of Joseph Smith to that time, the Bible was really still the central study of people in the LDS faith. And the Book of Mormon is a little bit of a kind of just sitting on the side. And I think as a result of him, if you talk to the average LDS member today, probably they are reading the Book of Mormon more often than the Bible. Although in our official curriculum, the what we call our standard works, which includes the Book of Mormon, Old Testament, New Testament, and Doctrine and Covenants, those will rotate once every 4 years. So it's supposed to be evenly split out. But I think Ezra Taft Benson, one of his legacies is that he fundamentally shifted our culture and how seriously we take the Book of Mormon. And so most people you come across today will be reading a lot of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. And I would kind of, considering his political leanings, like I want to say that, I would dare say some of the things that that are valuable from the Book of Mormon aren't even 100% the theology. Like there are things in there about human nature. Like there are stories in there about, identifying false flag attacks and other like socially destabilizing things that happen in a society that is destroying itself. And so when I read the Book of Mormon, I see some of those stories and I go, crap, we're doing it. And I don't know how to explain to people that we're doing this, but we're going to destroy our country because we're following these patterns that are described, because like the Book of Mormon describes the destruction of 2 different civilizations. And we are screwing up in the same ways as both of them did.
See, that's interesting because you had me wondering, well, what would it look like if Ezra Taft Benson had emphasized reading Doctrine and Covenants more than the Old Testament, for instance? What would it shift? Would the flavor feel differently? But I suppose
I don't think the Doctrine and Covenants has enough that it would be like that important stuff we're missing.
I see.
Because also the Doctrine and Covenants is only the covenants anymore, because the doctrine half was a part that was called the Lectures on Faith in the original 1835. And that part got removed along the way and is no longer part of our canon.
Okay.
So Doctrine and Covenants is just covenants now, but we still call it Doctrine and Covenants.
Good to know. Yeah.
You guys are getting a lot of bonus eggs that a lot of people are not going to get in the first conversation.
What's the what do you guys do with like removed doctrine like that? Like what's the like I asked the question in the chat earlier about kind of like historical theology, but this is sort of like specifically within the bounds of your deposits. When things have been removed from authoritative status, like are they still worthy subjects of like historical reckoning, or?
I mean, I don't have enough experience seeing how that really plays out to give a good answer to that question. I know that it's de-emphasized. Like you can mention some of these things in Sunday school, but if you're preparing a lesson, maybe you're not supposed to use them.
Yeah, and I would say in the past, things without the internet, before there was internet, things faded out of people's memories pretty quickly when I look at the historical record. And there wasn't like the memory that lasted to say like, hey, we should be emphasizing this, or to even ask questions. It's just like, okay, whatever is being put in front of you for 10 years, then suddenly that becomes the new norm. And so the internet has created kind of this new challenge where it's like all the history of the last 200 years are being uncovered and placed before us and being like, oh, wow, there has been a lot of, different shifts or emphasis over time. And what do I think about all these shifts? And, what lectures on faith, that's really interesting. I'm going to go look at that. What does that mean? And how, what value can I find in that? So it's kind of, I'd say still pretty early in that experiment to see how that pans out. But previous to this time, I think it was just easily forgotten, and just whatever was put in front of people was the next era of the church.
Yeah, we really only had, like me growing up, like I basically had access to my local, like my little tiny sliver of Nazarene experience. I didn't even know, the history that much, or if we had changed or anything. It was just such a narrow slice. But
Yeah.
these days, it seems like super expansive. It can be maybe too expansive.
Yeah, it can be daunting. Yes.
Rista is Nazarene Protestantism, right? Like that's another example of restorationism, right? Would you say, like, that's something that Rista and I have chatted about, if to peel back the veil a little bit, is just how many Protestant denominations from the 19th century in America in particular have these restorationist characteristics.
Mhm.
No?
Gotta get back to that second chapter of Acts, man.
Well, we were kind of a
Yeah.
mix. It's my understanding we're kind of mixed, like holiness, Pentecostal, few groups coming together. And then kind of by the time I came around, we were kind of moving in the 80s, moving out of kind of that holiness, not quite as distinctively Wesleyan in holiness. You could now go watch a movie at the theater, moving into lower E evangelical or big E evangelical, so that modern Nazarene churches, especially in a big town are going to seem just kind of generically evangelical, I think, for the most part, except for they won't drink or smoke.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the, like, what's fascinating about what's taken place in America over the last couple hundred years is it's not competing reformations. It is, people are using the term restoration, and they do mean that intentionally, and that's a very American phenomenon that I think is really fascinating and worth respecting. Why that kind of language is used in the meaning of that language. It's not because Reformation, you would just think, well, we're just reforming, like things got off track a bit. We're just setting them back on the track. And it's a bunch of people, from my background, my adopted background, as you heard, but my background is, it's a bunch of people arguing about who's the better Catholic. But but if you're a restorationist, and many denominations are restorationist, you're not arguing about who's the better Catholic. You're arguing about, well, things had to be kind of reset, which is different than realignment.
Yeah.
And that is part of the American conversation religiously since in some real sense, since maybe in some sense since the Puritans came here and decided to try and make a new Jerusalem, in the 400 years ago. So,
and from the LDS view, like, we actually see that, like, whole history there as like as a divine providence, like the settling and the creation of America and the Constitution. That's something in our faith that we actually reverence as being part of God's plan to allow this, revivalism and then restorationism, leading to what we think is the true restoration of the church from our theology. So that history really matters to us in our faith.
Well, the history of Christianity seems to have a lot of, we run into, hey, things feel off somehow, or I consult the history and we're not lining up quite. So then it's, what do you do from there? And there's probably a few different answers or approaches for how you do that. What it means to go back to the fountain, or whether you're just let it progress into something entirely new.
I mean, this is where I'm so in favor of seeking the Lord directly, because things only get lost over time. You, like, the only way to get something back that has been properly lost is for it to be revealed, for it to be made available, or for you to be shown where it is through, some process of seeking the Lord. Like that is what the Joseph Smith story is about. Is he was seeking for wisdom and he received. So it's, I don't know. I could probably leave it at that, and call it good enough.
Yeah, here's a question from Spatch in the comments. I don't know Spatch personally. Well, maybe we'll have to meet him one of these days. But maybe we answer this question, and if the Matts have any kind of final questions, or Sean, Steven, if you have any questions, we can kind of wrap up our questions, and then I probably have to go in just a little bit. It's getting late, but it's been wonderful speaking with you guys. I feel like we could probably go a super long time.
Yeah, thank you. I can see it written. Should I just answer it as it's?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Any thoughts on Denver Snuffer?
I actually had interactions with him back in 2013, which is when he was officially excommunicated from the LDS Church. And I know people involved with the movement. To me, he attempted to rewrite. He's a clever guy. He's a lawyer. He's thought about things deeply, but I think from my viewpoint, he rewrote early LDS history in a way to specifically try to condemn the modern LDS Church, and I think in a very faulty way. So I think he's rightly excommunicated, and I think there are well-meaning people that have followed that movement because, much like Sean has expressed, there are people that recognize that a lot of the fervor and seeking of God and heaven that was part of the earliest movements of the LDS Church have somewhat faded from parts of our culture and are not emphasized in the same way. And Denver Snuffer was somebody who came to promise a lot of those things, simultaneously trying to undermine and condemn the modern church in a way that I think was false. So I think that was the appeal. I think he came with some true appeals of saying, we want to seek God's face again, but I think he did it in a way that undermined in a way that I didn't feel was an honest or a bad spirit when I read and interacted with him. So that's my personal take. They're a small movement. I think they have probably like 20,000 people, which I guess couldn't be quite large for the factions that come off the LDS Church. But again, compared to the millions of people, it's still relatively a pretty small group. Most people don't know about them.
Sean, any thought?
I don't have any direct experience with that particular movement. I have been adjacent to a few others, and it's just a real mixed bag. There's a lot of sifting a guy has to do when trying to seek in order to find. And it's chaotic territory, and really you just have to make your peace with the fact that there's going to be a lot of unknowns, and you just have to go through it and try to make sense of what you can and figure out what is going to what is actually leading you closer and what is leading you further away or leading you to division. And at the end of the day, it gets into that thing of you just at every turn you have to be evaluating the fruit, and in some cases you have to be watching for some number of years to see what the fruit really is. I've spent time, I've been familiar with the Zion Media folks, and that's getting to be some strange fruit these days. And so it's people will come and go, but the thing about Denver Snuffer's movement is not unique. It's just an instance. And we just have to kind of navigate these things and figure out who's actually finding something that's good. And sometimes you find one little nugget out of what somebody's kind of thing is that they found, and you say, well, okay, they provided one useful thing. I don't have to keep the rest of it, but this one lead was helpful, and you just continue leaning on the Lord to help you salvage what you can from each piece of wreckage you find along the path.
Yeah, well said. Well, any final quick questions, quick answers?
Okay, we'll keep it brief.
That's okay. That's okay. We have to do a part.
No, not quick questions. An oddball one about communion, but I feel like that would open up a rabbit trail.
Well, let's hear it. We can always.
Well, let me ask the first question. Let me just is it true? I think I've heard somewhere that that Mormons use water instead of wine or grape juice for communion. Is that true?
It is true.
It is true.
It historically it comes from early in the Saints' history. They were, they had a lot of enemies, and usually they had to purchase outside of people in the faith, and they were worried about being poisoned. And so Joseph received the revelation that it doesn't matter so much the substances as the intent, and that's where water started. And just as a protective measure to not get poisoned, and it stuck. It doesn't necessarily have to. There's no revelation saying that we shouldn't, go back to wine or grape juice or something like that. It might even be more proper, but that tradition has just stuck, and there's no reason that we have to stay with it, but it has.
I was going to say, when I heard that, I thought that was especially for somebody who's part of the broad trend of restorationist movement. It seems like symbolically a very curious thing, just since Christ's first miracle was turning water into wine. So part of me is it's a weird is that not going backwards, but you articulate the reasons why, and that's interesting to me. But that's just it's
I think the temperance movement had an impact on Mormon culture that is unfortunate, because before that point, the word of wisdom didn't mean you couldn't ever drink alcohol. And so that's we're looking at a approximately 100-year-old doctrinal innovation, which is just at this point just more than half the duration of the church.
Yeah.
Well, at least you could dance. Nazarenes, no drinking, no smoking, no dancing.
Yeah.
Well, you can dance if you want to.
Yep.
You can leave your friends behind.
And to that point, to the point of leaving your friends, I feel bad now. Because I don't know what I was hoping for, except to just have great conversations with you guys. I hope you guys feel welcome. I feel bad because you guys were both, everyone, the three LDS folk who were here simultaneously had to defend their own personal positions and represent the LDS church at the same time with every question. And that probably was not, I don't know, maybe we just fell back onto something, or maybe honestly maybe that's just what introductions look like, maybe as people navigate that. So maybe that's natural and normal. But
I mean, you may have uncovered unintentionally some of the lack of cohesion inside the LDS culture, because we surely have disagreements.
Yeah.
Which maybe, and to celebrate that. Yeah. And I suppose you guys did gently highlight some of those, which I think was helpful, because that makes it as you pointed out, Sean, it makes a space that is recognizable to most people. With anyone who's in an organization or structure for a length of time from the inside understands that there's diversity within that. And particularly, Stephen, as you pointed out, if you're an orthopraxy forward culture, an organization, then that means you're tightening on the praxy, which means there's going to be some variation on the doxy.
Yep.
Which is really helpful to hear. Honestly, you guys honored us by navigating that. within earshot of us. I really appreciate that. I just hate that we couldn't reciprocate. But I suppose that wasn't really the topic.
I'm
I guess-
always happy to speak for all Baptists everywhere, just for the record.
Yeah. No, I think the questions were good, and I think that's, like you're saying, it's just a bit inevitable with trying to speak to the LDS Church and be fair to it, but also true to our variations in our private beliefs. So I think it maybe gave you just a representative sample, and I didn't feel like any of the questions were unfair at all. I felt like they were completely fair, and have definitely felt your kindness in the conversation, and have really enjoyed, the spirit and the intent behind the conversation has been really good overall for me. So
I hope you guys come around more. Hopefully Risto wants to host more things like these. Just throwing that out there.
yeah.
I mean, I've enjoyed my time visiting with Chad and Neil.
Mm-hmm.
So
This
those are
I've heard.
definitely good times.
You are a known entity, Sean.
Yeah. So anyone who watches this, you could check out. I'd recommend checking out the Facebook group, Latter-day Lobsters and Other Sordid Sinners. It's weird, like Sinners and Saints. Yeah, it's weird. Like sometimes I feel more at home there than in my evangelical world, oddly enough. So it's an interesting group. And then also to check out this little corner, which is that's super difficult. I can't point you to one Facebook page for that. Go look at Paul.
Go to Grim Grizz.
What was that?
Go to Grim Grizz. He's our aggregator now.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, it depends on who I'm recommend. That's always like depending on who I'm giving the recommendation to. You can go to Grim Grizz or Paul Vanderklay's channel, and then you're gonna have to do some seeking to find as far as that group goes.
I've really enjoyed Paul Vanderklay's stuff. In fact, I started listening to him a couple of years ago, and he was one of the people who kind of tipped me in a certain direction as I was trying to understand what happened to the mother. And he actually had made reference to a book that was talking about the religion of Israel before the end of the First Temple period. That was, I got just a little bit out of that, but it was enough of a lead trying to navigate my way to understanding what happened to the mother. And
that's right. You've got a whole theology of the mother, don't you?
We don't really talk about it that much other than implying it in a hymn or two.
I meant you personally, Sean.
Oh, heavens, yes. Yes.
You gotta come to Grand Teton Con whenever this happens.
We're gonna have a conference all about the divine feminine.
Okay.
Absolutely welcome.
Really, it's just us hanging around a fire in the Grand Tetons.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. On that note, I'm gonna play us out with some Hebrew kids singing a Hebrew psalm, and I hope you guys have a great night.
Love it. Thank you.
Lights up! Bring those lights up!
They put in this song because I don't speak Hebrew. Come on, David Hershkovitz, take it away.